Okay, so today we're going to talk about a 48-inch mower, or a zero-turn mower. So a couple of things right here. This is going to be a monthly check, or a weekly check, depending on how much you use it. But first thing I always like to check is watch and see how much it's used. If your pulley tends to bind up, or if it happens to sound like this one, where you can hear it squeaking, that's not good. That means it needs to be greased, and I actually ran out of grease as I was greasing this, but you want to grease it until you see it coming out the bottom of the unit on both sides, and then you should be able to spin it freely. This one somewhat spins freely. You can see this shaft has a little bit of grease on it. Another thing I like to check is the wheels. The wheels should, in some cases, have Zerk fittings on them, which this one has them. Let's see here. This one has it right here. So each one of these has Zerk fittings, so you want to grease those. Sometimes they'll have a PTO lever grease fitting, which you'll want to grease. And then underneath on an X mark, they actually have one on the back side here, where you have to go up underneath and engage the arm forward to do it. Another thing when I'm doing this is I always check my belts. You don't want your belt doing this. As you can see, this one has a wear spot in it, which it obviously got stopped at some point. So when you do your mower inspection too, you're going to want to spin the pulleys. Make sure they all spin freely. And this one's got a brake on it, but it doesn't have any binding. And then your idler pulleys, that one's good, that one's good. That one, not so much, that's going to need to be changed. And then I always inspect the engine oil, when I got it level. And then I always do my hydraulic fluid. And underneath, I don't know if you can see this, but up underneath here, there's a belt. And we'll do more on that later. But this one right here is actually full. There's two notches. This one being up in the air, it's really full. But if I was to put that back down, there's a cold spot and it would be right level. So you're going to want to make sure your HST, or hydrostatic traction system, is good to go. Then I always check my tire pressures. If you look, this one's been ran low. You can see because there's more tread in the center left, but this one technically needs new tires. Because if you get uneven tire pressures, what'll happen is it won't cut even. Especially on one like this. This is what they call a fixed deck. A floating deck would be if the mower deck here were on like levelers that hung it up, and it would have caster wheels on the center here. But these are actually your caster wheels, and being that it's a fixed deck, you don't need the extra caster wheels, or anti-scalp wheels in this case, because the caster wheels are actually fixed to the deck, and the deck does not float. The other thing I'll check too on occasion when I'm doing this is the shape of my pull cord. So this one right here is in decent shape. It doesn't have any frays. The handle's not broke. I just got grease on it because my hands are greasy. And then I'll check my fuel lines and make sure that when I'm looking at them, sometimes you'll see bubbles in these in the fuel filter. What'll happen when you see bubbles in it is that means it's got water in there. So, but I always check these to make sure that they're, they're all good. They're not cracked. I'll look at my spark plug caps just to make sure they're not cracked. And then underneath, I'll check the belt, and I'll check the idlers on that too, just to make sure. And then make sure that my e-brake is adjusted properly. On this one, it goes up against the tire. And as you can see, it actually kicks back. So that you want it to kick back. If it just goes limp and it just goes back and you can push it off without it actually kicking back, that's not good. That means it's out of adjustment. And then this needs to be fixed too, because somebody decided they were going to put a weed eater string in here, because obviously they lost a pin that goes through there. So that's something else that needs to be fixed. So just a little tidbit. Also, I like to verify that my throttle stays up when I put it up. Sometimes these will actually wear down. They have a friction plate underneath here that goes out, and if your throttle, if you have to use a bungee cord to keep it up, you need a new throttle cable. The wear plate, this little plastic piece right here, and on this other side there's a spring washer. As you can see, that washer that's uneven, that's actually a spring washer, and that's what keeps this post, or this lever, against the throttle. And then right here would be where you'd run it at full throttle. And then in other cases, if this was a choke system, it would go all the way forward for choke and then come back and rest here. But in this case, you've actually got a separate choke knob. And I've done a video on this before where you want to make sure that like it doesn't stick. So that's something else that probably needs to be done, is this thing will eventually have to have this throttle shaft taken out here and that fixed. And lastly, I'll just make sure, because sometimes guys will complain about it running like crap. If you get one that's blowing black smoke or it's doing something funky, check your air filter first. This one's clean. These things do get dirty, and they run like dog turds when they get dirty. And lastly, with the recoil starter, make sure it goes back in. You don't want somebody complaining about it not going back in or just having it hang out like so. That's just not good. Oftentimes you'll need a spring when you do these. You'll change out the spring, you'll change out the rope rotor, you'll change out the pawls, and then there's a top piece that goes on the top of the bottom that slides. I believe it's a friction plate is what they call it, which actually spins out the pawls, so it makes it so it locks against it, and then they come back in when it starts running. But anyways, that's just stuff you'll want to check when you're going through it. But anyways, this is a Viking X Mark 48, and that's what I'm using. The other grease points on this thing, if you have a sulky, we've actually got a grease point back here. That's why this is open like this. And then there's a grease point right here, which is why that is. And then these just connect with pins, and they don't really have grease points there, but they do have a pivot grease point, and then they have the other grease point right here on the bearing of the wheel itself. And you'll also want to verify too that these tires are aired up properly, because if they're not, these are not on a rim that has a tube in it. They're actually on a non-tube tire. They're actually rims that seal against a bead with the tire, and that's how they keep them inflated. Anyways, hope this helps. Have a good one.